She was just a quiet security guard, invisible, forgotten. But when disaster struck on a Navy pier, the truth came out. She wasn't just anyone. She was Whisper, a legend the military thought was dead. What happened next silenced an entire base. I never wanted attention. The irony is, I got all of it at once, right there on the pier, in front of the whole damn Navy. My name's Jordan Reeve. Most people just called me Reeve, or, more commonly, hey, security. I was a civilian contractor at Westbridge Point Naval Station, a sprawling coastal base off the Carolina coast. No rank, no ribbons, just khakis, a Navy polo, and a badge clipped to my belt that let me walk the perimeter and scan IDs. On that blistering morning, the sky was impossibly blue. Families were waving miniature flags, officers were lining up, and the ceremonial band was tuning up for the annual Fleet Readiness Day. It was one of those events where everything had to be perfect. Polished boots, crisp salutes, a PR dream. And yet somehow, I was the problem. Rear Admiral Philip Kessler's shoes tapped furiously on the asphalt as he closed in. I could smell the jet fuel in the air, hear the humming tension that comes from trying too hard to make a military machine look graceful. Kessler, tall and sharp-jawed, had a voice that cut through noise like a scalpel. When he snapped, everyone around him flinched. But I didn't. "This is General Hawthorne," he barked, nodding toward a high-ranking visitor beside him. "His clearance is solid. Your scanner's broken. Let him through." I didn't budge. "Sir," I said evenly, "if the system doesn't verify, protocol requires visual confirmation from the command center. It won't take more than 60 seconds. His eyes narrowed. "Your job is to assist, not delay." "I am assisting," I replied, calm and deliberate. "Just by the book." He leaned closer, voice low and sharp enough to cut metal. "Step aside, or I'll make sure you're off this base before lunch." I didn't move. It wasn't pride. I've been screamed at before. Humiliated. Broken. But I've also held dying men in my arms. One more angry admiral wasn't going to rattle me. What came next would snowball into something none of them expected. But in that moment, I was just a background detail. A nameless checkpoint contractor refusing to bend to a 2-star's temper. No one there knew what that refusal cost me once before, or what I used to be. They didn't see the scar on my side beneath the shirt, or the ink beneath my collar. They saw khaki pants and assumed nobody. And that suited me just fine. At 43, I blended into the background like a shoreline mist. Average height, lean, with brown hair pulled into a tight braid that never came undone. I kept to myself, spoke only when necessary, and moved with the kind of quiet intention that made people overlook me. I liked it that way. The Navy is a world of rank and ritual. Uniforms pressed to razor-sharp creases. Insignia polished to mirror gleam. You either wore bars or you didn't matter. I didn't wear bars. I was a civilian. A temp, technically. But I'd been at Westbridge for over 2 years, assigned to security detail. My job was mostly traffic control, access verification, and standing in the sun while midshipmen marched past me without a second glance. To most, I was just Reeve at Checkpoint 3. Some of the younger ones called me Quiet Watch. I could feel their eyes sometimes, curious, confused. They wondered why someone like me was still here. Why I never joked, never complained, never slouched in the folding chair at post. They didn't notice the way I watched their gait, the tightness in a shoulder that might signal strain, the momentary pause in breath that meant something deeper. They didn't notice because they weren't trained to. But I was. There was one man who noticed a little too much, Admiral Kessler. Our friction started weeks before the ceremony. A briefing room packed with uniformed officers, Kessler presiding like a king. I'd been asked to assist with logistics for a foreign delegation's visit. I raised my hand. "Sir, the route you've selected passes between the Armory and Hangar 9. There's a surveillance gap there. About 150 meters of blind zone. It's a vulnerability." The room fell quiet. Kessler gave me that tight smile, the one that said, "Know your place." "Noted," he said, then turned to the base's security chief. "Is that accurate?" The man shifted in his seat. "Technically, yes, sir." Kessler's eyes went back to me, cold and sharp. "Then we'll make sure the real decisions are left to uniformed personnel. Thank you." There was polite laughter. I nodded, said nothing more. But the next day, the route was quietly changed. And then there was the time he caught me examining the perimeter fence behind the motor pool. "Enjoying the scenery?" he asked, all sarcasm and smugness. "The soil beneath this stretch is softer. The fence integrity's compromised. Might be worth reinforcing." He scoffed. "That fence is fine. Don't go inventing problems to feel important." 2 days later, a work order went through. Reinforced with concrete. No credit given. Didn't matter. I wasn't after credit. But to Kessler, I was a thorn. A reminder that sometimes the unranked can see what the decorated miss. That's why, when the scanner flagged General Hawthorne's credentials, he didn't see a cautious security check. He saw an insult to his command. And I became the scapegoat. They say humiliation tastes different when it's public. I got my full serving that morning, on a silver platter, right next to the honor guard and the press photographers. The scanner eventually confirmed General Hawthorne's credentials. A corrupted file in the transfer from Central Command. A glitch, not a mistake. But I'd done my job, followed protocol, and delayed the entry just long enough to keep things secure. Any rational officer would have thanked me. Kessler wasn't rational. To him, my caution had embarrassed him in front of a visiting general and half the Navy's Eastern Command. And Kessler didn't tolerate embarrassment. So when the last of the SEALs arrived, sunbaked, ragged from a recent deployment, and cutting a sharp contrast to the spit-shine ceremony around them, I saw Kessler's eyes shift. He spotted me near the VIP enclosure, where I was directing traffic away from a bottleneck forming near the observation deck. He saw opportunity. He strode straight toward me, shoulders squared, jaw tight, radiating a kind of fury that was both theatrical and dangerous. The crowd parted for him like water. I held my position, watching him approach. My pulse stayed steady. My spine didn't bend. "You were told to stay clear," he said, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "Yet here you are, still issuing directions, still pretending you have authority." I kept my tone even. "Admiral, I'm managing crowd flow around the bulkhead. The stage is bottlenecking the main." He cut me off, voice rising with each word. "You are a contractor, Ms. Reeve. A temporary security asset. You don't get to direct military personnel. You don't get to halt a general. And you sure as hell don't get to act like this base answers to you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His voice was doing the damage he wanted. Every nearby sailor, Marine, officer, and family member was watching now. Dozens of eyes, some sympathetic, some gleaming with quiet interest. Nothing spreads faster on a military base than drama. "You're done here," he snapped. "Report to your supervisor. You're relieved of duty. Permanently." That was the moment. Not the fury, not the spectacle, the word permanently. He didn't just want me out of the way. He wanted me gone. Erased. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I nodded once, turned, and walked. My shirt sleeve shifted as I moved, and for a brief moment, a scar caught the light. A pale, jagged memory running up my right forearm. Burned deep, healed poorly, not surgical. The kind that only comes from fire, not stitches. I pulled the sleeve down with a practiced motion. Too late. I saw the eyes on it. The chief petty officer nearest me stared, recognition flickering behind his frown. Not from curiosity, from memory. That kind of scar had a story, and it wasn't civilian. I passed a Marine gunnery sergeant leaning against a support beam. His eyes flicked toward the neckline of my shirt. He caught a glimpse of something inked there, just barely visible. 2 black lines. Angled. Sharp. He straightened slightly. Not in defiance. In recognition. They were beginning to see. But the one who really saw, who looked and understood, stood at the secondary checkpoint 20 yards away. Lieutenant Commander Ronan Vale. SEAL team leader. He watched me walk, then turned to his Master Chief and murmured one word. Not my name. My call sign. Whisper. I hadn't heard that name in years. Whisper. It was never written on a badge. Never spoken in open air. It existed in sealed files and broken comms logs. It belonged to a person who had disappeared long ago, buried under layers of protocol and silence. Lieutenant Commander Vale knew the name. I could tell by the way he stilled. SEALs aren't easy to rattle, especially not men like him, forged by war and sharpened by loss. But that one word, it hit him like a ghost stepping out of a fog. He didn't speak again, didn't move, just watched me, studying the way I walked, the way I carried weight on my left knee to compensate for the damage in the right. He wasn't the only one watching. The Marines near the stage had gone quiet. A young sailor whispered something to her superior, eyes flicking toward my retreating form. The atmosphere shifted. People weren't sure what had just happened, only that it felt wrong, like a mistake had been made, one they didn't fully understand. And then, chaos erupted. A sound like metal screaming. A mechanical groan that swallowed every other noise on the pier. I turned fast. My limp vanished. A lighting rig, 3 stories tall, bolted to a wheeled platform, was giving way. The hydraulics snapped. One side lurched. A web of cables tangled and snapped. The entire steel arm came crashing down toward the bleachers where the youngest sailors and their families sat shoulder to shoulder, unprepared and exposed. Screams tore through the air. Even Admiral Kessler froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Panic roots fast when it's unexpected. But I moved. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. My body switched gears with the precision of memory. Of instinct. Brace and cover, I shouted, voice slicing through the chaos like a flare through darkness. I was no longer a quiet contractor. I was Whisper again. VIPs to the bulkhead wall. Move to the port side. Now. My voice wasn't desperate. It was commanding, measured, lethal in its clarity. I pointed toward the steel wall of the observation ship docked nearby, the only structure that could absorb the impact of debris. 2 young sailors stood frozen near the bleachers. I caught their eyes. You too. Moved the children through the service hatch behind the substation. They jolted like they'd been slapped, then ran, hurting families behind them. The rig came down with a thunderous crash, steel tearing through benches and folding chairs that had been filled seconds earlier. But not anymore. Not a single casualty. Smoke billowed. Screams quieted. In the aftermath, through the dust and adrenaline, I turned back toward the stunned crowd. I wasn't trying to be seen, but they saw me. They saw what Kessler hadn't. Not a contractor. Not a nuisance. Not a woman in khakis and a polo. A warfighter. A commander. A ghost who had once whispered orders in firestorms. The SEAL team was staring now. Commander Vale didn't blink. His lips moved again, the word forming slowly, reverently. Whisper. Not a myth. Not a rumor. Real. And alive. The last echoes of metal on concrete faded into stunned silence. First responders surged toward the collapse site. People were helping each other up, but they weren't looking at the wreckage anymore. They were looking at me. I stood still in the middle of the cleared zone, breathing hard but steady, scanning the crowd with the same trained rhythm I had used years ago in much deadlier places. I spotted injuries, none critical. A few bruises, one sprained ankle, a broken wrist maybe. Alive. All of them. I knelt beside a boy who'd been separated from his father, helped him up, brushed the dust from his face. You're all right, I told him. You did everything right. The boy nodded, still shaking, and I guided him to a medic who had just arrived. Behind me, footsteps approached with growing speed. Commander Vale. He pushed through the remaining bodies, ignoring the murmurs and questions and gasps. His team followed behind him like wolves scenting blood, tense, alert, unflinching. He stopped a few feet from me. He didn't salute. Not yet. He just stared. At the scar on my arm. At the lines on my face. At the weight in my shoulders. Like a man confirming what his gut already knew. Then came the Admiral. Rear Admiral Kessler shoved past a cluster of junior officers and came to a breathless stop. His face was drained of its usual command red flush. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Maybe, in a way, he had. Who the hell is she? He barked at Vale, though his voice cracked. Vale didn't turn. Instead, he said, Admiral, with all due respect, I believe you know her. You just forgot what she looks like when she's not in uniform. That stopped Kessler cold. The silence thickened as Vale finally turned to face him. Sir, you're addressing Major Jordan Reeve, United States Air Force. Retired. There was a sound, almost like a gasp, but no one claimed it. A major? Air Force. Kessler's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Vale wasn't done. She flew deep penetration sorties in Ghost Ops under SOCOM command. Ran support for Tier 1 teams in zones so black they didn't even show up on satellite logs. Rumor is, her last call sign was Whisper. He paused. Not a rumor anymore. The word dropped like a stone into the stillness. Whisper. I saw the eyes widen around me. The recognition. The disbelief. The respect. It wasn't just a name. To Special Forces, that call sign meant survival. It meant someone out there had your back when everyone else forgot you. Whisper was a myth, a battlefield rumor. A woman who showed up out of nowhere, saved lives, and disappeared before anyone could say thank you. And now I was standing on a Navy pier in a contractor's uniform. Kessler staggered back a step, face pale as chalk. He glanced around and saw what I already knew. No one was standing with him anymore. The balance had shifted. It was no longer about who wore the stars. It was about who'd earned them. I didn't want the attention. But the moment Lieutenant Commander Vale raised his hand in a crisp, deliberate salute, I knew the rest would follow. It wasn't a salute to a retired officer. It wasn't ceremonial. It was the kind given from one warrior to another, the kind that says I've read the reports, but now I've seen it for myself. Major, he said, voice low, resolute. Behind him, his SEAL team followed in perfect synchrony. 7 men, trained to kill without hesitation, snapped into salute like their lives depended on it. Their hands struck brows with a crack of reverence. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I just looked back at them, remembering every time I'd flown above teams like theirs, carrying the weight of knowing that if I missed, even by seconds, good people would die. They weren't saluting me. They were saluting the one who never let them fall. The gunnery sergeant from earlier stepped forward next. His eyes were locked on the faded ink below my collar. That's not a decoration, he muttered to no one in particular. That's a mark. He recognized it, the twin lines of the Raptor talon. It was the identifier of a very small, very secret group of elite F-22 pilots trained not just to dogfight, but to infiltrate deep airspace and extract intelligence in real time. Tactical pilots who became silent executioners when command lost contact. Most had assumed the program folded after a disastrous mission overseas. But I'd survived. Barely. More salutes followed. An Army colonel on temporary attaché. 2 Marines in dress blues. An Air Force NCO who stopped mid-step and simply stood frozen, his hand rising slowly, as if compelled by instinct alone. The crowd moved like a wave, slowly, then all at once. Sailors, officers, enlisted men and women. From the youngest midshipman to the oldest warrant, they turned toward me. Stiffened. Saluted. It was a sea of respect I had never asked for and never wanted. Rear Admiral Kessler was the last to move. His face was pale, lips drawn tight. His command authority, once absolute on this pier, had collapsed beneath the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. But he knew the Navy well enough to recognize when a tide had turned. He raised his hand, slowly, precisely. His salute was textbook, held longer than necessary. It wasn't for the crowd. It was for me. An apology, wordless and complete. I returned it with a nod. That was enough. Because if there's one thing the service teaches you, it's this. Real rank isn't pinned on. It's earned in the silence, in the fire, in the unseen moments when no one's watching, and you do the right thing anyway. I never expected to wear a uniform again. After the crash, after the fire, after the months of silence in that hospital where even the windows didn't open, I told myself that part of my life was over. I'd made peace with it. Or tried to. The Air Force had quietly retired me, pinned a final medal on my chest, and sent me home with a body that wouldn't bend right and a mind that didn't sleep much. They said I was lucky to survive a mid-air ejection at Mach 1.6. Lucky the Raptor systems gave me just enough time. Lucky the rescue team found me before the enemy did. But I'd left more than my aircraft behind. I'd left Whisper behind too. For years, I didn't look back. I didn't speak at memorials. I didn't go to reunions. I found quiet work, civilian work, somewhere the uniform wouldn't follow me. Westbridge Point became that place. A quiet guard post, a routine, a chance to fade. But now, under a sky filled with salutes, I realized something else. You don't choose when the uniform returns. Sometimes, it finds you again, not in medals or ceremonies, but in the moment you stand between chaos and those who can't. That's what happened today. The chaos didn't ask if I was still enlisted. It didn't care about scars or contracts or the limp I tried to hide. It just came, and I met it. The moment passed, but the silence lingered. I stepped away from the crowd, away from the salutes. I returned to the edge of the pier, where the collapsed lighting rig still smoked and twisted, a monument to what almost was. The boy I'd helped earlier was sitting now beside a corpseman, eating a juice pack like it was the most normal thing in the world. Good. Let them forget quickly. Let them laugh again by sunset. Kessler approached me then, his posture stripped of all the arrogance he once wore like armor. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. Major Reeve, he began. I waited. I can't explain, he started again, faltered, then tried a third time. I treated you with disrespect. That's not just on me. That's on the uniform. And I'm sorry. I nodded. Thank you, Admiral. He looked like he wanted to say more, but I spared him. We all have jobs, I added. Mine today was to watch that checkpoint. Yours was to host this ceremony. Let's both make sure the rest of the day goes smoothly. Kessler didn't argue. He simply gave a nod, turned, and walked back into the fold of command. That was enough. I didn't need more, because my job wasn't finished yet. The ceremony continued, but not as planned. There was a new current in the air, something unspoken but deeply felt. The music resumed, the speeches went on, but everyone, from officers to civilians, carried a different posture now. Straighter, quieter, like they'd all just remembered what real service looked like. I kept working. That's what people don't understand about us, the quiet ones. The ones who don't speak unless it's necessary. We don't do it for medals or applause. We do it because duty doesn't come with an off switch. I walked the perimeter, checked with medics, talked to shaken parents and wide-eyed kids, made sure the story they would take home wasn't one of fear. I saw Vale and his team lingering near the edge of the crowd. They didn't intervene. They didn't try to draw attention. Operators never do. But they watched me move through the aftermath with the same focus they would give to clearing a compound. He approached again near the docks. Reeve, he said, no rank this time, just my name. Commander. I never thought I'd see you again. You weren't supposed to, I said simply. His eyes narrowed slightly. They told us you died on ejection. I almost did. They lied. Wouldn't be the first time. He let that sit for a moment. You saved more lives today than you ever did in the air. I didn't respond. Not because I disagreed, but because I remembered what it felt like to fail. The times I hadn't gotten there fast enough. The faces I couldn't save. Those were the ones I carried. Not medals. Not promotions. Whisper, he said again, this time not as a question. As a truth. I don't go by that anymore. I know, he replied. But I needed you to know, we remember. All of us. You may have disappeared, but what you did, what you were, that stayed. There was a long pause between us. Then I asked, how many of your team are original? 3, he said quietly. The rest are younger. But they've all heard about you. I looked out at the horizon, where the sun glinted off the sea. Then let them forget. Let them build their own call signs. Vale stepped back, just enough to let me know the conversation was over. But before he turned, he added, we don't forget. We don't ever forget. Then he walked away. The SEALs disappeared like smoke into the crowd. I watched them go, then turned back to the staging area. There were still people to check on. Still tasks to finish. I wasn't a legend. I was just a woman doing her job. And that was enough. By sundown, the pier had returned to something like order. The broken rig was cordoned off. The wounded were treated. The bleachers, once full of ceremony and pomp, now sat quiet in the orange light of evening. I stood near the checkpoint where it had all started, where Kessler had tried to erase me with a few words. Funny thing about power. The louder someone uses it, the more fragile it tends to be. I leaned against the metal post, sipping from a warm water bottle, my shirt collar damp with sweat and adrenaline that was finally starting to fade. That's when the young ones started coming. Not in a group. Not loud. Just 1 or 2 at a time. A sailor in his early 20s. No rank yet, maybe just out of boot. He walked up, stiff-backed, eyes locked forward like he didn't know where to look. He saluted. Ma'am, I just wanted to say, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I nodded once. Thanks, petty officer. He looked relieved to have said it. Then he walked off without another word. A Marine corporal followed. Then a woman from Air Force Logistics. Then a pair of Navy nurses. All of them came with the same thing in their eyes, something between gratitude and disbelief. Like I was part story, part real. Like I'd stepped out of a myth and reminded them the world still had quiet heroes hiding in plain sight. But I wasn't a hero. I was a survivor. A woman who carried too many ghosts in silence and who had, for a brief moment, let the world see what she used to be. And now? Now I needed to vanish again. I finished my shift. I filed the incident report. I shook the hands I had to and avoided the ones I didn't. I watched the security chief send a text with the words, I owe her more than I can say. But I didn't wait for thanks. The stories would spread, I knew that. They always do. Whispers in break rooms. retellings and chow halls. Reenactments told at night with just enough exaggeration to make it legend. They'd say a civilian saved a pier full of people. They'd say she moved like she'd trained with ghosts. They'd say the Admiral got shown what real command looked like. And maybe, in the quiet corners of the base, some would say the name. Whisper. But I hoped they wouldn't. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted them to know it's not about the call sign. It's about the choice. The choice to act when it counts. To lead when no one else will. To stand the watch, even when no one's watching. My locker was exactly as I'd left it. Neat, simple, spare. Same folded polo. Same plain khaki pants. Same worn paperback tucked in the corner. A copy of the things they carried. Pages softened by years, corners curled, the spine nearly split. I didn't read it for comfort. I read it to remember. On my wrist, the old silver bracelet caught the fading light. Scratched. Unpolished. Engraved with only 2 initials on the inside, ones no one had ever asked about. The man it belonged to had vanished on a mission not even the Pentagon would admit happened. But I wore it every day. Not as mourning. As armor. I sat on the bench for a while after my shift ended, alone in the locker room, letting the silence wrap around me. The day had ended. The crowd had dispersed. The stories had begun to grow roots. But the dust had settled. And I was still here. Unseen again. Exactly where I belonged. Before I left, I made one quiet stop. The small security office near the west gate. I turned in my incident report. No embellishment. Just facts. Time, location, chain of events, response actions taken. My signature at the bottom, followed by one final note. Request, reinstatement optional. Continue assignment as scheduled. I didn't want special treatment. Didn't want promotion or praise. Just the post. Just the watch. Let others wear the medals. Let others take the credit. I'd done my job. That was enough. As I stepped outside, the last breeze of daylight brushed across the pier. It carried the faint scent of ocean and fuel and heat, the smell of the lives I'd once lived and the one I had now. A small voice called out behind me. Ms. Reeve. I turned. A girl, maybe 10, running from the direction of the bleachers. The same one I'd seen earlier, with the pink ribbon and the tear-streaked cheeks. She held out a crumpled paper flag. You dropped this. I hadn't, but I knelt anyway. Took it gently. Thank you, I said. She looked up at me, then whispered, My dad said you're a real pilot. I was, I said quietly. You still are, she said, and then ran back to her family. I stood there a moment longer, flag in hand, until they disappeared into the crowd. And then I walked on, a woman in khaki pants and a security polo, into the fading sun, where ghosts don't need to speak and legends know how to fade. Because the truth is, service doesn't end with the uniform. And some watches never really stop. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.